So here we are after the Hungarian Grand Prix of 2021, back with the Joe and Toby Talk podcast. What a time to come back. We will be rounding up all the drama at the Hungarian Grand Prix, as well as talking about all of the teams in the 2021 championship so far as F1 goes into its summer break. I'm here, Joe, with my long-time podcast partner, Toby Jones, TRJ Gamer, no longer a content creator, but, you know, he's still here. He's still creating podcasts, aren't you?
I am, yeah. And what a time to come back. We've been looking for the best time to come back, whether it was Baku or even the last race in Silverstone. But no, we said we'll leave it now till the mid-season. And really, what a perfect time to come back. We're recording this just after the Grand Prix, which has finished a little bit late at circa 4 o'clock. I was expecting it to be done by 3:15, 20 past 3, but clearly not. And what a race it was. And I think there is only one place to start. And if you're watching us on YouTube, it's exactly what you can see on the screen. And that is the crash at the start, which was caused by Valtteri Bottas. I must admit, a few expletives came out of my mouth when I saw that happen, but it was, without wanting to sound all grumpy here, it was pretty much everyone but Lewis who got took out, wasn't it? Lewis was at the front, and it was like an old-fashioned Codemasters F1 sprint lobby where everybody went off at the first corner. I mean, even Ricciardo got spun round, and that wasn't anything to do with that, really. It was just unbelievable kamikaze, and we saw that Alpine, who was in second after the first corner, which, of course, will turn out to be very important. And I thought it was Fernando. I think, well, Fernando's done well there, but no, it was Esteban Ocon. But what did you think of the crash? Obviously, we've heard in the last hour or so that Valtteri Bottas has got a 5-place grid penalty for the Belgian Grand Prix. Stroll's got one as well. We have discussed that just before we went on air, and I'm not exactly sure both of those fit the same crime, so I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about that. But it was a very strange crash. You could be bitter and say Bottas just ploughed into everybody there, but that was a big misjudgment, especially for somebody as Bottas' experience. You know, he's what, the 4th or 5th oldest guy on the grid at this point. You know, it was very reminiscent of the Schumacher crashes in 2012 for me. The Bruno Senna one, and I think it was John-Eric Verne at Singapore as well. These things happen. I think it was made to look a lot worse by the fact it wasn't just Norris took out. It was also, pretty much bowling pins at the start. I think that's how Charles Leclerc put it as well. But no, it was a very interesting turn one. I certainly wasn't expecting that. I know you were saying in the build-up you expected Hamilton and Verstappen to come together, and I think I said in jest that it will probably be Bottas that crashes into him, not really having any idea that was going to happen. But again, it's Bottas, a really terrible start, and that has been his massive Achilles heel this season. He's just losing so many places at the start, and in the wet weather, it's the worst thing to do because you can't be aggressive. You can't go and try and claim those positions back at turn one because look what happens. He goes straight into the back of Norris. Norris goes into Verstappen, and I don't know how that didn't take Verstappen out. And, Perez gets mopped up in it as well. But, crazy start. I mean, the biggest shock to me was that we actually had a standing start. The FIA's position these days seems to be standing starts, rolling starts once you get into wet weather conditions. So whether that will tempt the FIA to look again and say, look, maybe it is too dangerous at the start. Because something quite horrible could have happened after Bottas went into the back of Lando. His car could have went anywhere, and especially if it was like Silverstone, I guess. Obviously, in the dry conditions, you wouldn't have to brake for that first corner after the newly named Hamilton straight. But it very easily could happen, and like you say, it is quite dangerous. But as you allude to, Bottas bad starts. We know he's a very good qualifier, and that's never been the problem. And to be on very equal footing with Hamilton as a qualifier is an absolutely fantastic compliment that you can give to Valtteri Bottas. But I think we all know, we can see from several examples now that
on the start, that really is where Bottas loses it. And if he'd have kept P2 and Hamilton would have got out of that first corner P1, I think we wouldn't be talking anything like we are today. I think we'd have probably been talking about a Mercedes 1-2 and a fairly drab race. Maybe Verstappen could have gone for a little bit of change. Obviously, the weather made a huge difference. If it was dry, very doubtful that would have happened. But obviously gutting for all the guys that went out, and it was no fault of their own. Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, Lance Stroll, Sergio Perez as well. And, it's horrible for all those guys because, as I alluded to, for, of course, Leclerc, Norris and Perez, those guys are really high up in the championship. And, of course, proof on the table by the results of Alpine today that there were some big results on the table. And missed out by some of the big teams there. And with Carlos Sainz only finishing 4th, you have to say for Ferrari a little bit of a disappointing day as well. But ultimately, the team that was disappointed the most surely has got to be Red Bull. I mean, Verstappen got a solitary point out of it, which I think he did well to get, to beat Daniel Ricciardo in the McLaren. But you can see from this track that you very much struggled to overtake. We saw that today. And of course, Verstappen going without that barge board on the right-hand side for the majority of the Grand Prix, that kind of helped anything whatsoever. But you just cannot believe the events that have taken place since Baku. When Max was looking to win that Grand Prix and had that tyre failure a couple of laps out. And it really has all come crashing down from there. Obviously, that tyre failure you can argue somewhat organic, and then, after that, won the next 3 races after that, and we were talking about Max Verstappen potentially walking this championship and being 30-40 points above Lewis, and it's all over, Red Bull have got the fastest car, and then they came together in Silverstone, and proof from the Sky F1 team that we don't need to talk about that anymore now, because it's becoming a bit dead, that one, to be honest. But it's so gutting for Max Verstappen, and you just have to think how he comes back from that. He's obviously scored 1 point today. Lewis 15, further 25 for Lewis at Silverstone. Of course, another 2 with the sprint race, but we won't get into the vagaries of all that. But just on raw racing today, he's lost 14 points, another 20 odd at Silverstone. You have to fear for Max, really, because Lewis always has such a good run, tends to anyway, in the second part of the season. When we go to Belgium, to Italy, I'm sure maybe that the fans at the Netherlands might prove to be a little bit different, but you wonder, don't you, that maybe this year for Red Bull now, they have to prioritise it even more. If they were 40-50 points ahead of Mercedes, obviously they won every race from Monaco to Austria, whether in the hands of Perez or Max Verstappen. And then, of course, Mercedes won at the British Grand Prix, and they got absolutely nothing out of it today. So, an absolute disaster for Red Bull. Obviously, they didn't score anything at Silverstone either, apart from the sprint race, of course. So, absolute disastrous for Red Bull. I don't know how they come back from that. I don't think they can lodge any sort of appeal today, or indeed get Alex Albon to recreate that first lap incident. But so hard for Max going into that break now, knowing that he had 4 out of 5 race wins. Could have easily had 5 in a row with that Baku win. And I know you can say, well, Lewis made that mistake in Baku as well, so I was quite happy with that, because that made it almost the status quo, and it was quite even between the two. And, with what's happened now, I guess you could say in Silverstone, Lewis's fault, but with no fault of Lewis's own, but it's really come back to Hamilton. But in fairness, it's only 6 points between them still. And with Max Verstappen having the upper hand, I guess from a neutral's perspective, that's probably the best thing to have happened. If Max would have won Silverstone, or even finished 2nd or 3rd, and then gone and finished 2nd or 3rd today, you'd have probably, I'd still be talking about running the maths in my head pretty quickly. He'd still be sort of a race win ahead of Lewis Hamilton. So, just horrible luck for Max Verstappen today. Obviously, Silverstone a different story, but terrible luck for Verstappen. Doesn't help Perez's cause either, but of course the championship, the Drivers' Championship, bigger than the Constructors' Championship at the moment. But saying that, the Constructors only 4 points apart as well. It is really, really incredibly close. But how Red Bull come back from that, I think a 4-week break is going to be a blessing and a curse for them. But an absolutely horrible fortnight for Red Bull. Absolutely horrible.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with you. There was only 4 points between Red Bull and Mercedes after Britain, but it's now actually gone to 10 points in front for Mercedes. So which is crazy. Which is crazy. You know that Mercedes, kind of a one-man team at the moment, have managed to overhaul that Red Bull lead that seemed unassailable just a couple of races ago, really, particularly in that constructors. But as you say, it's a big moment for Verstappen, and I think I said this to you after the British Grand Prix. I seen that as Hamilton's 2018 moment, where I don't know if you remember, but Raikkonen punted Hamilton round at the first corner, and Hamilton fought back to second behind Vettel, and it all just seemed to go for Hamilton after that, and we all know what happened to Vettel that season, and arguably he's only just recovered from it. So, you know, I think it's a big summer break for Max. I think it's come at a good time, actually. I think if we were racing again next week and the week after, it could have very quickly got away from Max. But, you know, he's got that 4 weeks to reset now before Spa, I believe. So we've got Spa. We got a triple header coming up, haven't we? Spa, Zandvoort, and Monza.
Yeah.
So you know, traditionally, you look at those tracks and potentially think it would suit Mercedes more than Red Bull, but especially on the evidence of the last couple of Grand Prix, where Mercedes seem to have found something, or you know, a couple of tenths of a second, which makes all the difference. And
you know what? I don't want to predict anything. I know we're in this game to predict, but after today, after Silverstone, it's crazy.
I mean, after what happened at Monza last year, you know, I think we'd be fools to predict what will happen. But it's looking good for Lewis at the moment. But you know, if we'd done this podcast 2 races ago, we'd have said, well, championship over, Max is going to walk this. So
yeah, I think the unique part compared to 2018, as you allude to, is obviously Mercedes developed better. Now, you know, I guess you could argue Mercedes have gained a couple of attempts, so the same has happened here. But the cars are so close, they really are. You know, that it just adds that spice, and that's what I allude to for 6 points in the championship. It might well be, we think at least, that on pace that the Red Bull is still the quicker car. So Lewis being ahead is certainly better for the neutral, but where we go from here, it's still a long way to go. There's still potentially 12 Grand Prix. I can't see there being that many taking place, obviously going outside of the European bubble after the Italian Grand Prix. So it'd be interesting to see how that turns out, whether we have Bahrain take 2, I've heard potentially Qatar being thrown in there, Austin take 2. I certainly can't see Brazil happening, put it that way. That's one that you would probably take off the list. And of course, with the recent situation in Japan, we might be taking that one off the list as well. But we're going to make that the last we talk about the coronavirus on this podcast today. Yeah, we don't even make any more of that.
Yeah, too right. It was just interesting hearing you talk there, and I'm looking at the races we've got left this season, and in particular Lewis, you know, absolute unbeatable territories of Austin. If we have 2 races round there, does that equal out the 2 races round Austria? Mexico tends to be a pretty good Verstappen circuit. And Abu Dhabi, you know, in the last couple of years, Red Bull have looked pretty strong there. Brazil as well. So, you know, Lewis has really got to take his chances over the next few Grand Prix. Russia, Valtteri Bottas will no doubt be leading for 95% of that race, and then have to let Lewis through. And Turkey as well, you know. Hopefully we go to Turkey, but as you say, it's difficult to see all of the races taking place, but it'll be interesting. It's so close. It's the closest championship we've had for a long time, I would argue. You know, obviously Vettel and Hamilton had very close rivalries, but that none of them really turned into anything by the end of the season. I see this one being a little bit different, and I certainly don't see Lewis winning it by USA, for instance, like he usually does. I think it will go down to possibly Saudi Arabia, that sort of region. But hey, one retirement changes everything, so we'll just have to wait and see on that. But yes, so that was the start of the Grand Prix, and obviously that caused Max a bit of devastation, as you've put it, and he, as you say, he did well to come out with P10 in the end. But what it also did was absolutely mix up the grid massively. And George Russell was leading coming out of the the formation lap. I think that was because of Williams being right at the end of the pit lane and not getting involved in all of the carnage. But yeah, I mean, that was a bizarre sight, and Hamilton kind of making the only choice he could by driving to the grid. And you know, he wasn't to know that everybody was going to pit. He would have looked stupid if he was the one that went into the pits and everybody else stayed out. So it was just one of those situations. But I know you particularly enjoyed that. But I think
it was one of those, wasn't it? That everything today that you said would never happen. Imagine there's only one car on the grid. Imagine that it happened.
I mean, you know, we talk about Max going through the ringer. Lewis Hamilton has been through the ringer today massively. You know, at one moment he looks like he's on for a certain victory. The next he's right at the back of the grid. You know, and Max is ahead of him. The next he's looking like he might win, and you know, and then Fernando. You know, he's been through the ringer today, and he's done well to come out with P3. To be quite honest with you, with the amount of battling he's had to do. But yeah, you know, that lights out with one car was reminiscent of USA 2005. It was really quite funny to see that, and then them all trundling out of the pit lane afterwards. I'd be interested to see how many of the cars were actually sat waiting for the lights, or how many of them were still getting serviced, and you know.
Well, I think Ocon had been in the pits for 26 seconds by the time that the lights went out. So I think Ocon would probably be waiting at the end, depending obviously how he got held up. There seems to change around some of the places in the pit lane, surprisingly. At Silverstone, they were a little bit different, which I didn't quite understand. But I know he was in the pit lane for that long. But yeah, like you say, a lot of the drivers wouldn't have been waiting. But I mean, thank God, after 18 minutes, we finally mentioned the name of the person who won the bloody race, for goodness sake. It took us nearly 20 minutes to credit the first race winner, Esteban Ocon. There's something about these French Monegasque, you know, region drivers. We think about Leclerc, Gasly, Ocon, obviously Jules, who isn't with us anymore, but you know, these guys have done such a good job since they've come into the sport. And I was only thinking before we started this, I thought, well, Ocon's quite a new boy in the block, isn't he? Is it? I don't know if I'm getting this right. I'm sure I am. Is it 5 years at the next race since he's made his debut? Because he replaced Harry-Anto, didn't he?
Yeah, I guess it was 2016, so yeah it will be. Yeah, you often think of Ocon as being around a lot longer. I think he's
had a stuttered start, hasn't he? Put it that way.
But you know who he reminds me of a lot, and you'll probably laugh at this, but Nico Hülkenberg in the fact that he had a very good solid first year full year in the sport, and then he was dropped, and after however many seasons, and took that season out, and then came back with another team and just seemed to get stronger, and that's kind of what I'm seeing with Ocon right now. You know, it'll be interesting to see if he can break out of that midfield gaggle of teams, and I'm sure we will talk about it as we run down the teams and possibly look towards 2022 as well. But you know, realistically, he's not going to win a championship in an Alpine unless something crazy happens at the start of next season and they've got the quickest car. So, you know, I'm trying to see where his progression goes through. But what a performance today, staying in front of Vettel, who, you know, Vettel looked well up for it today. He was taking some wacky lines through corners and, you know, really trying to put Ocon under pressure. But it was great to see those two teams at the top battling out. And, you know, after all the stick Vettel's had over the last few years and at the start of this season when he was getting beat by Stroll, you know, he's really coming back to form recently. And, well, looking at the standings, he's now got 48 points, which is probably more than he had last season.
It's not going to be far off, is it?
It certainly isn't.
Right,
but he's well inside the top 10. He's probably battling for P8 with Daniel Ricciardo, which I think would be a really solid first season for Sebastian Vettel. But what a race! And I think halfway through, I fully expected Carlos Sainz to be the one that was on the top step of the podium celebrating his first victory, but it turns out to be Esteban Ocon. And much like Perez and Gasly won their first races last season, it's wonderful to see another pair of legs on the top of the podium, because it had become quite monotonous over the last few years, just seeing the same three guys up there every single race.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a quick count now, I think there's 11 guys on the grid who've won a Grand Prix, which is unprecedented, really, I think, if you think about it. But great drive by Ocon. I think he was helped by the fact she struggled to overtake around Hungary, sure. But I think you also have to credit the way he drove. The way he held his tyres, it was a long stint that him and Seb went on. They pitted fairly early for the hard tyres. And the FIA recommended, Pirelli even, recommended 50 laps for the hards. After what happened at Baku, I wouldn't listen to a word they say. But, they took that to the limit and went those 50 laps on the hard tyres, did a fantastic job. Although, it would have probably only been second or third today for Ocon, just to put a bit of a dampener on it, if Alonso hadn't have had the best drive that I think he's ever had. I think we could probably go that far. In his defence of Lewis Hamilton. I mean, that was, as Ted Kravitz put it on Sky, it was a battle we've all been waiting for 12 years to see. And I certainly didn't think we'd see it this weekend and this year, the gulf in pace between those two cars. And it's really strange, because they often say that if you're 2 seconds ahead here, you can get past quite easily. But Alonso really dispelled that myth. He was absolutely fantastic. He's a wily old fox, is Fernando, but you've got to accept he's not up against some Mazepin wannabe here. He's up against Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time champion, 99-time race winner, and all the accolades he's had.
And arguably the best overtaker in the sport. Go on.
He knows all the tricks in the book, Lewis, but Alonso knows them too. And his defence was absolutely fantastic. I think that Lewis getting all irate on the radio was, fair. It's what happens in this sport. But, there was nothing that Alonso did that was particularly dangerous. He'd got track position and, he pulled off some brilliant defensive manoeuvres a few times. I thought, oh, well, he's not going to hold that. But it wasn't until he made his first mistake, locked the tyres at the first corner, and Hamilton went past quite easily. But a brilliant day for Alonso, a brilliant day for Alpine as a whole. 35 points for them. Brilliant stat from yourself earlier that it's their first race win for 8 years, obviously under the Lotus name prior with Kimi Räikkönen. So an absolutely fantastic day for Alpine. And then just adding to your comment about Aston Martin, that you're absolutely right about Seb. Over the last few years, I've become more and more of a Seb fan. I think we all have. We've him just generally being a really nice guy. I think that when he was winning his championships, we all got a bit brassed off and his arrogance with the whole multi-21 situation. But that is all forgotten now. I think he's more than redeemed himself off the track, and on the track he's starting to redeem himself as well with the performance he had in Baku, the performance he had today. He's just had some really strong drives.
And Monaco.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, I forgot about Monaco. Yeah, that's a good shout. But he's doing well. He really is, and that's exactly why Aston Martin signed him ultimately. And you've got to give him credit for that. And I'm really delighted to see it. A bit of a shame for Lance Stroll. 5-place grid penalty, which is bonkers. Really, he didn't really do much wrong, but.
He actually tried to avoid a collision, and it could have been a really ugly crash, and it would have involved Esteban Ocon. Interestingly enough, he would have done the same as Bottas did to Norris.
Right.
He was right behind him. So hey, we could have had a completely different outcome to this Grand Prix, and we might have been talking about the return of the finger. But as you say, it's really refreshing, and I think it's what we've been calling out for years, because we all talk about 2012 as being the great year with 7 different winners in the first 7 races, and well, the only real shock to the system there was Pastor Maldonado winning in Spain, and that's the only one that's comparable to what we've seen in 3 races in the last year. And that's credit to what's going on and what actually happens when you have a battle at the front of the field, and a little bit of changeable conditions, and maybe Bernie Ecclestone was right with his sprinkler idea all along.
I was only saying that. I was only thinking about that earlier on today. I was surprised that the rain didn't last too long, actually. It was just a bit of a flurry and then it stopped.
I think it's with the heat. I think had it been a lot cooler in Hungary at the moment, maybe it would have stuck around a little bit longer, but the heat sort of burns it off. But no, as you say, wonderful to see Ocon win, wonderful to see Vettel back in it. And I tell you what, you say Alonso helped the top 2 hold on to the win, and I agree with that to a certain extent, but I think some plaudits have to go to a certain Canadian driver, Nicholas Latifi, because early on he was holding up the guys behind a treat, and Vettel and Ocon were miles ahead. Potentially had Latifi not been there as the cork in the bottle, as I like to call it, we could have seen a Sainz up there a lot sooner, and maybe even a Gasly up there. And I think it possibly would have been an even closer race between Ocon, Vettel, and Gasly, Sainz, for instance, because they're all in pretty much equal cars. You would suggest that midfield is very, very close, as it always is. But I think in particular this season. But
so let's focus on Williams then. Let's have a look at Williams, because I think we've talked a lot about Mercedes. We talked about Hamilton. We talked about Bottas as well. So let's talk about Williams. As you say, Latifi was in nosebleed territory.
Yeah, P6 after the first corner. That was like F1 2010 levels of overtaking. that was brilliant from Latifi. But it was just staying out of trouble. Let the other people fight amongst themselves and just find a clear gap to go through, and that's what Ocon did as well. And hey, it paid off for Latifi, and a double points race for Williams for the first time since 2015, I would imagine. Maybe 2016. I don't know, to be quite honest with you, but you'll have to look that up, Mr. Statman. But great to see P8 and P9 for Latifi and Russell. But it'll bring me on to something with Russell a little bit later, I think, and what his future prospects are in F1. But it looks like he's gonna be on on the beating of Latifi over the season, much like he was with Kubica the other year when he scored that point at Hockenheim. And it sort of doesn't seem fair for Russell based on his qualifying form.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. I think Latifi has to be given some credit. I feel
Definitely.
sorry for Latifi. He's almost in that Bottas realm, I feel. I really do feel that Russell is a fantastic driver, and Latifi might be a great driver, but the problem is he's up against George Russell, and you can't win in that sort of situation, except when you do, when you beat your teammate. And props have to be given to him today. He drove a very good race. Chuffed as I think any F1 fan would be. I mean, who doesn't like Williams? To go and get 6 points. Surely with that, they now jump both past.
Yes, they're up to 8.
Anyway, and Alpha. And that might be it for the season, because I can't see Alfa Romeo scoring 5
Well, they'll
points.
have to score 5 points, won't they? And that's unless there's another similar race, I don't see that happening. I mean, they didn't finish in the points today, and that was a great opportunity for them to do just that.
They both had penalties, didn't they? Which I don't think helped. That didn't help them at all. But a great race from Williams. Really chuffed. I think their car is better. I think, ironically, this is one of their weaker circuits. You could see that by the qualifying performance of only 17 and 18. But what a cracking performance from those guys today.
Just a quick line on Russell and a quick question, really, that I want to pose. And it seems this inability of George Russell to close out a good result for a team. Now, we seen it last year a couple of times at Williams, where he may have been on for points and, he bottled it, so to speak. There was obviously out of his control the one-time Mercedes win opportunity that he had, and obviously that was a pit stop error that stopped him. But again, didn't close out the result necessarily. And then there's been a few times this season where he has been running in the points and again just struggling to close out those big results, and that's something that a Fernando Alonso or a Sergio Perez, for instance, in the last few years have been able to do, and that's maybe making me question, well, how good is George Russell? I don't doubt that he is a very, very fast driver and will develop into a very good driver, but is he going to be on that elite level? And I'm not sure. I've got to be honest, I'm not sure.
I think it's a good question, and one that can only be answered, obviously, when he goes into a top car. And I think it is definitely a when rather than if. I think it's a tricky one to start comparing him to the likes of Alonso and Perez, because I don't think the car he's got, okay, it's improving, but at best it's really the 8th best car. So when you do see him in the points, obviously Imola last year, you can't excuse that. He put it in the wall, and that was his fault. That's black and white. Obviously, Sakia, didn't go for him, and he's had some real misfortunes. So it's not quite half a dozen of one, half a dozen of the other. Somewhat it may come down to George, but I think he's been very unlucky. I don't think there's any doubt in that. So to answer your question, I'm not too sure. I know exactly where you're coming from. I think we'll just have to see with time and more experience. But yeah, it is an interesting one. Obviously, we saw when Kubica beat him at Hockenheim all those moons ago to beat him in the championship as well. It's an interesting question, but maybe one more down to misfortune. Who knows?
But it's one to keep an eye on, isn't it? And we're through his development throughout the years.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody else who had a lot of misfortune today was Charles Leclerc, who had, I think, a really good chance in the wet weather to make the most of it. Obviously, another one who went out at the Malay at turn 1. But as you allude to, Carlos Sainz, it was a little bit of a surprise that he didn't go on and win today's Grand Prix. I was a little bit amazed after he was making their strategy for them, and I think given Ferrari's history on strategy, it's probably wise for the driver to do it rather than any other plonker in the team. But I was surprised I didn't react to that Hamilton stop, because that's what Sainz was hinting at. Whether he hadn't got fresh rubber, I'm not quite sure with that one. I don't know the detail there, but I think if you had reacted to Lewis Hamilton, it might have been a little bit different story. Okay, he might have only got third, but take that incredible Alonso drive out of the way, and he could have got second, and knowing maybe something could have happened to Lewis Hamilton. You throw all these things up in the air. He could have had a race win today, so a good P4, but I feel like Sainz underachieved today, actually.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. He was in a very good position today, and just didn't seem to be gaining too much on the Alpine or Aston Martin car ahead, and maybe we're not giving enough credit to how good a job Sainz and Leclerc have done, and maybe that Ferrari just isn't on that level that we think it is. But an interesting stat for you, after today's race with Sainz, Leclerc and Sainz are on exactly the same amount of points in the championship, 80 points each. So it's a fairly balanced team, that one, and on paper I think we've said it could be pound for pound the best driver lineup on the grid, possibly along with the McLaren one if Ricciardo pulls his socks up a little bit. But a missed opportunity maybe for Sainz today, but still a solid P4, getting 12 points. If he'd finished P4 in normal circumstances, we'd have said what a great drive it was. So it's just the circumstances that it's in. Ocon and Vettel drove very, very well, and Sainz was just not able to chase them down. He kept Hamilton behind for a fair bit before Hamilton stopped, so maybe that took a little bit out of him, and that's, as you say, why didn't they react? But it's all the ifs and buts and maybes of Formula One at the end of the day. But Ferrari, over the season, I think definitely a step up from where they were this time last year, and they're currently sat fourth in the championship, in a very, very tight battle with McLaren for third, only 3 points in that at the moment. So that will be an interesting one to watch going forward.
Come on, let's make some predictions then. Who wins that battle? Because it is so tight. Norris is really pushing McLaren there, isn't he, at the moment?
Yeah, I think I think because McLaren, I think on paper have got the better car, and I think Ricciardo's just ever so slightly getting to grips with it over the next few races. I think McLaren will push on now and secure third again.
Yeah, it's a good shout. I think the inconsistency of the Ferrari doesn't help. I know France was a real extreme, but some weekends it's really good, some weekends it's not. And as I say, I felt like today was an opportunity missed for him, I have to say.
Yeah.
And AlphaTauri will probably feel the same way. Maybe not an opportunity missed, but a bit gut-wrenching considering how much the likes of Alpine gained on them.
Yeah.
It was a good 15 points for them today. 15, of course, because
Yeah.
Pierre Gasly got the fastest lap point. Pierre P6, Tsunoda P7, but obviously 35 for Alpine, 18 for Aston Martin. So not a massive game, but in a field where these gains are to be had, then you've got to take them ultimately. They don't come round very often. But again, another solid performance from Gasly, who's had a good start to the season. I think that AlphaTauri is a bit of a strange one. I expect a little bit more from that AlphaTauri. I don't know about yourself. But I think the real question here, and I've heard little bits of it, is possibly Tsunoda might be moving on at the end of the season and might be replaced. I don't quite know about him. I'm not too sure. I feel like he's got the speed. He's a very quick driver. All 20 of them are, else they wouldn't be here. Maybe with one exception that we won't mention. But he's definitely got the pace. He showed that in Bahrain. You can see a clear chain of events that I think he was bigged up to early, and the pressure of that got to him. But it obviously doesn't help that Gasly is driving out of his skin. But again, with being irritable on the radio, to be honest, and to be brutal, he needs to grow up, doesn't he? To spit his dummy out every 5 seconds and say, well, Pierre needs to go faster. There is a way to do it, isn't there? And there is a way to go about it and not try and push your way through as a debut season. It's almost best just to have at a team like AlphaTauri, to have a quiet debut season and impress when you can, like at Bahrain. But I think all the praise has got to him, and I think that he's going to have to look at the second half of the season as a recovery. He got into the team because of the Honda backing, being the Japanese driver. And there are other drivers knocking at the door. You can see in the lower Formula, with Formula 2 and Formula 3, that, the AlphaTauri, Toro Rosso, whatever their name is, and has been in previous years, they're not afraid to boot somebody out the door and give somebody else a go. I mean, hell, I wouldn't be surprised to see Danny Kvyat back in there someday. I've seen so many U-turns on that one that I wouldn't be surprised to see that one again. But what do you think about Yuki Tsunoda? And of course, obviously to start, how's Pierre Gasly's season gone so far?
Well, I think ever since Gasly has stepped back into that AlphaTauri, or Toro Rosso as it was, I presume when he went back in, he's shown that he's a top driver in a midfield car. I don't see him being a title winner, if I'm brutally honest, after seeing him up against Max. But hey, he might be a new driver, who knows. Tsunoda, as you say, he's got the pace. He just hasn't got that race awareness at the moment. I would have expected by now that potentially he would have been a little bit more sensible. I think he's still got that big mistake in him, and he reminds me a little bit of Romain Grosjean from 2012. Not as destructive, but in terms of he's got the speed, but he just needs to know how to utilise it. And well, put it this way, I don't think Albon would have finished P7 today, so I think he's got that going for him. I I don't watch the lower formulas, so I don't really know who would go in there instead of Tsunoda at this time. And but with the revolving doors of Red Bull, who knows? And obviously Perez has only got a contract for the rest of the season, so there's no guarantee that he's going to be staying at Red Bull next year. But as far as I know, but yeah, AlphaTauri started today in P5 in the constructors, and they've dropped down to P7, so it's not a great day for them. And I think we've seen recently that the pace of their car has seemed to lag behind a little bit on the Astons and the Alpines, so I think that could be a tough one to take, and they may have found their position in this year's constructors. But Gasly, certainly a very good season for him. Tsunoda, he's getting points in there. I'd like to see him be a little bit more careful, and as you say, just grow up a little bit. He does remind me of a young Max. I say a young Max, he's still young, but in those very early days, Max was quite whiny as well. So it's finding his feet, I think, and with a teammate like Gasly, pushing him hard, I can see how it's frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. But, he's got to grow up sometime. You have a short time in this business to prove yourself.
Especially at that team.
Exactly. Red Bull are ruthless. Did you see Christian Horner putting Helmut Marko's coat on for him earlier?
I didn't. I wish I did, but I didn't.
Yeah, it was a little bit lame, if you ask me. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of whiny, speaking of Helmut and Christian, it stinks of the same situation that Red Bull always seem to get into, and it was a point I made. I think in our F1 season preview that Mercedes seemed to win with grace. I mean, I use that word very loosely, but you tend not to get this whining and getting drivers to recreate lines and
that's
requesting
going too
reviews.
Far, it's just ridiculous. I mean, we all know Hamilton and to be honest, all the greats are very good at whining. When they don't. Hamilton
loves a whinge.
But it's just beyond ridiculous to go to the steward, say you've got new evidence, and what's the new? Well, Albon recreated the line, and we've got GPS from when Hamilton got past Leclerc. It's honestly, if you're gonna do it. I guess gracefully isn't the word, but I'll nick it from you. Do it sensibly. If you're going to put something in, don't hire a lawyer and make yourself look stupid.
But it's constant with Red Bull, I feel. Ferrari tend to cheat. That's the way they tend to win, or at least bend the rules. Red Bull seem to wind their way to try and get results. Whereas Mercedes have focused these last 2 weeks on improving the car, being ready, and I think it showed this weekend. I think it shows that Red Bull have spent all their time thinking about an incident that could have happened anywhere with anyone, and it showed this week, and they almost got the karma for it, I think, with what actually happened in the end, because they qualified out of position from where they would have expected, and they wouldn't have been involved in that big melee had they put all of their focus on to this weekend. And I think Verstappen would have probably been ahead of Bottas on the grid, but that's just my piece on it. I think it is very silly, and I think it's good for them that we've got a summer break as well, because they're getting too silly about things now. But anyway, we've got off topic a little bit with that. But AlphaTauri, a very, very solid team. And speaking about another one of those sort of midfield runners, Alfa Romeo. I know your favourite Kimi Räikkönen is in there. How do you feel that they've got on this season? Of course, from testing and maybe from free practice in Bahrain, we were thinking that Alfa Romeo may actually have a decent car this year, but it doesn't seem to have been the case.
Yeah, I think things didn't go their way today, that's for sure. But that Alfa Romeo is only going backwards, unfortunately. The Williams is on a par with it, I think. I don't think the Williams can get much further up the grid. But I think Alfa Romeo are ninth at most races now. You can pretty much bank on 9 times out of 10 both of their drivers going out of Q1. And it will be Kimi's last hurrah, I think, this year. I think that his son's starting nursery in September, and he's had a very good go at it, but he's just not going anywhere now. And he's not been disrespected by anybody. He's up against a good teammate in Giovinazzi, who I think has upped his stock over the last couple of years with some very good performances. But it is probably time for Kimi to step aside. I hate to say it, but all good things have to come to an end, and I think now is the right time come the end of the season. Given Kimi's previous form, I would be surprised after a race if it goes bad for him to go, sod it, I'm off, after like he did in 2013. But yeah, Alfa Romeo, a bit of a nothing race for them. The penalties really confined them to the back. Haas, which we'll touch on, very similar as well. Mazepin went out with a very strange crash in the pit lane. Thank God it wasn't out on the track. But, Mick Schumacher, very reminiscent of his dad for a few minutes of the Grand Prix, I thought. He put up some very good defences. Obviously, in that car, you haven't really got a prayer, but against Verstappen...
To keep the championship leader behind you for as many laps as he did, I think, he was a contender for driver of the day, I think, had that happened later in the race, potentially he would have got a lot more votes. But an excellent race
shows
for
how
him.
much of a stinker that Haas is, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. Well, and obviously they're not developing at all this season. No. And I tell you what, in Bahrain or wherever we start the season in March, whenever it starts. They better have a good car. That's all I'll say. But as you say, Kimi, it could be his last hurrah. Potentially might want to hang around for one more year just in case Alfa have pulled a rabbit out of the hat next season. But even then, there's a few little mistakes that are just creeping into his game now, and he doesn't seem like the Kimi of the last couple of years to me, and it is a little bit sad to see. But of course, there is one team that we haven't really talked about too much, and that's possibly because of their almost absence from this race through kind of no fault of their own, but that is the British boys, McLaren, everybody's favourite team to support, it seems, and the girls swoon over Lando Norris, but he didn't have the best of days today, did he?
No, he didn't. Again, another one caught up in that start incident. He looked pretty brassed off when he come off the track, obviously, at Valtteri Bottas, as I'm sure a lot of them were. But bad day for Norris. Ended his brilliant run of 15 consecutive points finishes, which is brilliant, that stat for Norris. And he's probably been the driver of the season so far, if not in the top 3 at the very least. But Danny Rick, strange day for him. Real strange day. He didn't... Well, he got spun, didn't he, at the start?
Yeah, I think they were saying that he did pick up some damage at the start as well, and I think the fact him and Verstappen were on the track together possibly offset us noticing that.
Possibly, but you would have expected him to finish better than he did, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Verstappen's obviously got the excuse of a massively damaged car, and there might be facts that we don't know about Ricciardo, but not to have finished, say, P8 above the Williams cars, he's a disappointment for McLaren. Obviously, not the best day for Ferrari. Again, as I alluded to earlier, a missed opportunity for Ferrari. Could have done a lot better and gained a lot more on McLaren, with Norris not finishing the race. But just didn't happen for them today. And as you say, pretty absent. Daniel Ricciardo obviously couldn't get much out of it. And a bit of a shame, given they've had a really good start to the season. Obviously with Norris, especially. But we'll see. We'll see after the summer break. But it's a bad day for McLaren, but not too costly, I think, in the real run of things.
Yeah, it's cost them in their run with Ferrari, but I do think they will come out on top. But an interesting one for you, and I was actually quite surprised looking at this. Daniel Ricciardo's scored 50 points this season, which when you put that against Lando Norris doesn't seem like a lot, but 50 points is decent at the halfway stage. He's looking at 100 points in a season, which, given the season he's had, is a big surprise to me. you know,
he had a good start, didn't he? To be honest, he had a pretty good start. 6th place in 2 races. To be honest, in Imola and in Spain. I think the problem has been his absence from some Grand Prix, i.e. Monaco only finishing 12th, from Styria only finishing 13th. And then when you compare some of his results to Norris, when Norris has been getting big results, obviously in Monaco, finished 3rd, did Norris, and Ricciardo only 12th. And I think that all bar today, maybe one more in there, but 1 or 2 races he's beat him in this year, and that's it. And I think that is the biggest surprise of them all. I think there's no doubt that anybody worth the salt would get a decent amount of points in that car, but the gulf between the 2 drivers, I think it's been a real shock. It has, and I'm just hoping that Ricciardo just gets to know the car a little bit better and does a better job. But as I say, it was a shock.
Well, yeah, as you say, Daniel Ricciardo actually until today hadn't beaten Lando Norris at any of the races this season, and that is a huge shock to me. 3 podiums for Lando Norris, and
just looking, he did
four
beat him in Spain.
5th places. He did beat him in Spain, did he?
Yeah, he finished 6th, Lando, and he finished 8th. But yeah, apart
from
that,
it's the other way around on the Wikipedia constructors standings, which is bizarre. So that's why you shouldn't trust
Wikipedia,
yeah,
kids.
never ever. But it's a big second half of the season for Daniel. Obviously, he's not going to get dropped from McLaren, but they would have expected a lot more from him, I think. And if he was more on Lando's level, we'd have been having a 3-way battle for the constructors, because with where Bottas and Perez are in the championship, they're very much weighing down the Red Bull and Mercedes challenge. So, it's an interesting one, definitely, and I do hope that he picks it up, because after the Hulk left, I think Ricciardo took my mantle of my favourite driver to watch. So, I do hope he picks it up very very soon. But where do you see McLaren going in the next few years? Do you think they'll be back to championship contenders, or?
I think the problem at the moment is that the top 2 are just too strong. Whether they can gulf that gap and bring that down in 2022, don't know. I think so. They're showing all the right signs. I think, as you allude to, if Ricciardo gets it together, they've got a very strong team. Reminiscent of Ferrari, not quite the youth of both drivers in there. And you wonder maybe where McLaren would go next, looking into the distant future. Obviously, nothing's guaranteed for Norris to be there for a long time. I'm thinking potentially a Gasly figure could go in there. I don't know. He's the only one who seems like somebody could go in there.
Or an Ocon.
George Russell was my name from last year, to be honest. I feel like if Ricciardo hadn't signed, George Russell would have been perfect for that team. But it didn't quite happen in the end, to have a double British team there. But yeah, like you say, Esteban Ocon is a chance. But talking about the next few years in the short term, I don't think they'll change that lineup, unless Ricciardo's poached for a Mercedes seat or something crazy like that. But
or Norris.
Yeah, or Norris. But
I mean that's
definitely
that's
showing
the thing.
The right signs.
I think everybody has been talking about Russell quite rightly for the second Mercedes seat, but there are other drivers out there. Should Mercedes want to go there and poach one of the big names from another team? I don't see it happening.
No, I think that deal's done now. I think Hamilton's stopping for another 2 years. I guess as long as they've got their number 1 and Russell does work out, then they can look for somebody else. And whether that someone is a Nick de Vries, possibly going to Williams next year and then building him up for that, possibly an Esteban Ocon. Is he going to be happy playing second fiddle? Or will he got a big drive by then? So for Mercedes, it's a bit of a gamble, because I don't think they're going to go back to Valtteri Bottas, put it that way, when Hamilton's retired. I think that if Bottas loses that seat, I think that's very much goodbye Vienna for him.
I don't actually see him staying in the sport. I've got to be honest. I don't know where Bottas goes from Mercedes.
Well, Alfa Romeo's the only real link, the only one I can see happening with the departure of Kimi, but apparently the Mick Schumacher link's gone now. That's gone kaput. But there's a couple of names, I'm sure, from Junior Formula and all the rest of it that they could possibly pick up. Could they look at
Robert Kubica?
No, not Robert Kubica. Could they look at, one of the quote-unquote Williams rejects? There's a big battle there. De Vries, Kvyat, Hulkenberg. There's a big pool that they are looking at, so I'm sure Alfa Romeo are looking at the same pool of drivers, and 2022 is an opportunity. Giovinazzi's a good driver, but I don't see much happening for them. But it looks even bleaker for Haas, I have to say. I even wonder whether they'll be on the grid next year. We I guess with Mazepin's backing, that obviously helps proceedings, but apart from that, they haven't got a lot more going for them. And to be truthful, I know they've got the excuse of not developing much this year, but last year wasn't exactly much better, was it?
No, it's a very good point, and no, I think it's interesting. We obviously had the driver merry-go-round happen last season, really, before anything even kicked off. So the big question mark for me, and I wonder if you've got an opinion on this, and it's what happens to that second Red Bull seat, because I don't think Sergio has set the world alight with his pace at Red Bull. He's a dependable second driver, but actually he's still 4 points behind Bottas in the championship. So if we're suggesting Bottas is probably going to get booted out, and thinking of how ruthless Red Bull are, where do they go with their seat for 2022? Are they going to possibly try and lure Ricciardo back? Or are they, maybe looking at a Gasly,
I think
get him back in there?
The problem is options. With Mercedes, the only real reason they're going to get rid of Bottas is that Russell's knocking on the door. I think that if we had no George Russell figure, I think they'd be quite happy to continue with Bottas. I really do, because... and again, Bottas has had 5 runs at this now. He's had a couple of runs that he's been pretty good but pretty unfortunate. He had one year, which I think was 18 or 19, can't quite remember, where he was pretty much anonymous and finished 5th in the championship. This year obviously hasn't been the best for him either, been pretty unfortunate. But even when other drivers do poorly, he doesn't capitalise. And that is the big problem, like at Silverstone when Hamilton and Verstappen collided. How he didn't win that race is ridiculous. He shouldn't have been on the same strip of road as Lewis Hamilton. If you put those guys in the different cars, and Bottas had the collision with Verstappen, Lewis would have beat him by a lap. I fully believe that.
Yeah.
It just shows that gulf between the two. But to answer the question about Red Bull, they can't put Gasly back in there. Albon's a no. Tsunoda ain't going to happen. So the only one is Ricciardo, and I can't see Daniel Ricciardo going back in there now. I think he's got a good seat at McLaren. It's too much of a risk to change again and play second fiddle. I think if Ricciardo can improve his performances, he could very much be, in a crazy situation. If McLaren are a Mercedes next year and it's a title fight, it could be very close, for example. He's not going to get the same treatment at Red Bull, so I don't think that would work. And obviously he gets paid quite a hefty chunk at McLaren, in excess of £15 million. Red Bull wouldn't be paying him that much. All these different things come into it. I know it's hardly like a footballer where money comes into it that much, but it is definitely something to think about. And I think that I just don't see any options for Red Bull. Esteban Ocon, he's a Mercedes driver. I can't see that happening. All the permutations you put through your head, it just isn't going to happen. And I think that Perez is a good second driver. It's only his first season at the team. He's shone, I think, really, in some aspects. Obviously, he won in Baku, and had some good performances. But I think potentially the way they've gone with the car hasn't helped. I think that they've obviously developed the car to Max Verstappen's liking, and maybe that hasn't helped him. I'm not too sure. I can't think of any real explanation for his turn-off in form recently. But we'll see. I think that Perez is the right man for that team. When they come to change that, there could be some new kid on the block who they go for. But at the moment, they've really severed ties with anybody who could potentially be a name who could go in that seat if not. And it's too late to snap up a Carlos Sainz figure who's made his big move now. This is the problem. George Russell. I'm very inclined to think that if Russell didn't get the Mercedes move next year, Red Bull would be mad not to go knocking on Russell's door and get him in for next year. I really think that. I think that would be a perfect opportunity, because we're going to be talking about years now before that comes. I think we've got a really exciting crop of young drivers Pierre Gasly, Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen, George Russell. Can't remember if I mentioned him or not. Lando Norris, even Tsunoda you could put in there potentially, you don't know. But Lance Stroll, of course, Esteban Ocon we've seen. So we've got a really good string of young drivers, and unfortunately, even though they were the young driver academy, they've got to this point now where they've got their one young driver in there and they've got a little bit stuck because the tactic of having two in there hasn't worked.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with you, really. They've had their chances over the years, and I think, when you said it there and putting it like it is, the only reason Perez is in that seat is because they ran out of options, and it's going to be interesting. I think next year, I agree with you. Probably Perez will stay for another year. At least, and obviously once Lewis retires, probably at the end of 2023, that's going to set off another big chain reaction of driver moves. Fernando will be probably gone by then. Kimi
I would
will
make
definitely
no
be
predictions
gone.
about that one. He's going to go until he's 60 the way he's going.
Yeah, well, we were saying that about Kimi a couple of years ago. Everybody, comes to the end one day, but it is going to be an interesting couple of years, and hopefully we do start to see more races like we had today, where we have a refreshing Grand Prix, because these used to happen back in the day, back in the late noughties, when Jenson Button won a race for Honda, for instance, and David Coulthard finished third at Monaco for Red Bull when Red Bull weren't very good, and these things did happen more often back then, and hopefully that's what we're going to see going forward as the teams get a bit closer. This budget cap may well have had the impact that it's desired to have, and the teams aren't as far ahead as potentially they were 2-3 years ago, and I think we've seen that with Mercedes this season, but no, it's been a pleasure to talk about F1 again, and in a positive light. We're usually ranting about how bad the racing is, but what a race today, what an advert for F1, and hopefully just a glimpse into what the future might hold.
And talking about the future, we've got to wait 4 weeks now for the next one.
Yeah.
Thank God MotoGP's back next week.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a titanic battle between Max and Lewis towards the end of the year, and we all hope that goes down to the very last race. I think with the point system the way it is, I think it's unlikely, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Obviously, we've got another sprint race coming up in Monza, I believe. And I don't know where the third one is. Or have they possibly not announced that yet? I don't know.
What was that, sorry?
The next sprint race, I think that might be at Monza.
Monza and then Brazil.
Brazil, okay. Well, if that happens, I suppose. Yeah. But no, it's been a pleasure, Toby, and it's I don't know how long we've been on the air, but thank you to anybody who is listening. And I know that there are a lot of people, particularly on the YouTube side, that have been finding the podcast and particularly listening to our World Snooker Championship preview for whatever reason. But
hint, it's happened now. Watch the review instead.
Yeah, so thank you for all of the support on that, and hopefully we will be coming out with these podcasts a lot more frequently when things do happen. We did actually plan this podcast before the crazy race today. It just seemed to go hand in hand, but I think we will have a few different bits of content coming out over the summer to keep your guys' ears bleeding with listening to us two ramble on about sport and knowing not a lot about it. But no, thank you very much for joining me, Toby, and thank you very much if you're listening on Spotify. Obviously give us a follow. If you're listening on YouTube, then of course subscribe, and let us know your thoughts down below in the comments section about today's race in Hungary, but also the wider F1 world in general, both in 2021, and what do you see happening for the future. Maybe give us a predicted driver lineup down below. I know people do like doing that, and we'll be back I'm sure after Belgium and saying, well, we were wrong, Max has won by 30 seconds, there you go, Red Bull back on top.
Yeah.
or words to that effect. But thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Goodbye, everyone.